Hello, Liz.
Hey, Tom, how are you?
Your sound is amazing.
Oh, good. How is that possible?
Wow.
Wow.
Miraculously. Based on feedback from people that heard the pilot, I thought it was a necessary prerequisite to record another podcast, but to make sure that your audio quality was better.
I appreciate the advantage. Thank you.
Not a problem. And you're fully recovered as well from what you had.
Yeah, I am. I think I still sound like I have a cold and it's kind of going around, but much better than I was. And like I said, in the past when I had gotten to that point and then I would get up to teach or be at a conference and give a talk, then I would completely be without a voice.
Yes.
For a day or two. So I just didn't want to risk it. But yes, it's back. I'm better.
And for regular listeners, the frequency of this recording should be once every other week, typically. Mm-hmm. If either of us are ill or something comes up or what have you, there may be an additional week thrown in there. And I've got to apologize this evening because for some reason, San Jose, what's it called? Anyway, the San Jose airport, they're rerouting all the flights over my house.
Oh, really?
So hopefully the audio quality will be good on my end.
Oh, but interesting.
I received a lot of feedback from the pilot recording, and the main feedback that I've run with is this notion that there's still a need for folks who want a biota podcast or want something similar to the old biota podcasts. And also, I guess the sense that we have a luxury to have that audience, although I think this might become something else. But the need to provide a different level of interpretation, different level of kind of philosophical analysis and kind of a deeper dive than one may normally expect. So with biota, I had a relatively flexible, kind of whimsical standard. We could take all callers and talk about, whatever came through. But I think the general interest, or certainly the feedback that I received, was that we still have an advanced audience through the biota podcast, and they are looking for, not necessarily artificial life, but certainly crossover discussions. And I wanted to talk a little bit this evening associated with some of my recent development with Noble Ape, but also, any other topics you want to raise. Do you have any topics you want to kick off with?
Well, I actually I wanted to put a plug in for a book that I'm working on because I'm still looking for potential writers for it. And it dawned on me that the topic of the book might be of interest to our listeners from several different angles. So it's going to be an anthology, a collection of chapters. The title of the book is Emerging Technologies in Forensic Science. So I'm looking at anything from new ways of looking at DNA analysis, new ways of prosecuting criminals, greening the prison system. I mean, there's all sorts of different angles to take, but digital forensics, cybercrime, and those things, I think would appeal to a lot of our listeners. So, if anybody's interested in learning more about the book or this is your field and you might want to contribute a chapter, I would say get in touch with me because it's very much a work in progress. I'm still trying to make it come to fruition.
I'm not sure whether you know this, but I used to write, and when I say I used to, I was about 15, probably from about 14, 15 through to about 18, I wrote antiviral software, and some of it was picked up by the Australian government. And it was a pretty strange period of time because I realised by the time I turned about 18 that I couldn't go and continue on with writing antiviral software. There were about probably 7 or 8 people in the world who wrote antiviral software at the time. And I was kind of a junior but slightly, known quantity through that. And it was a very strange group of people. I met one of the fellows in Malaysia. His name was Louis Hong Thong. And he wrote the antiviral software for the United Nations.
Wow.
Amongst others. I mean, the funny thing is that these so you've got your kind of commercial level, Symantec, McAfee antiviral software. And then you have specialist antiviral authors that are like a level above that, basically. And typically, work for large government institutions, these kind of things. And they were all nuts. They were all paranoid. Louis Hong Fong, I was allowed to take his photograph provided I never showed anyone the photograph, and he was just a crazy paranoid guy. You know, he wouldn't tell me. He mentioned his daughter, and then he said, "But I can't tell you anything more about her because the secrecy has to remain hidden," and all this kind of stuff. It was the kind of classic bad spy novels kind of folk.
Yeah, and you can understand how it happens, though. I mean, if you think about that stuff all the time and you're trying to design the software to thwart those people, I can easily see how that would become paranoia pretty quickly, you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the strangest things happened when I started to write the software. I've written about some of this in a book called Field of Chaos. But, I can't recall how many, but I received probably 2 or 3 death threats through that period of time. And the family phone was kind of utilized, so either it was semantic or it was some crazy hacker or, all these kind of things. It was just a really very strange period of time in my life. And from that, I mean, the only thing I've taken from that is a good understanding of kind of computer organisms, which kind of, in fact, funnily enough, one of the simulations that I developed through that period to model how viruses spread was the agar simulation. They both had the same basis, which went on to be the cognitive simulation in Noble 8.
Okay.
But yeah, computer forensics is an interesting field. I think it's probably been considerably mainstreamized in the more than 20 years since I was an antiviral software.
Yeah. I mean, that would make for a cool chapter, though, a retrospective, or, this is where it was 20 years ago and this is what's around the corner.
Yeah.
You should consider that.
I could certainly, I mean, the main thing that I found was just, I guess I realized I couldn't have like a normal, like late teens, early 20s lifestyle and still continue to write this antiviral software. It was all too crazy. I mean, funnily enough, I was in high school at the time. There were a couple of girls that thought, oh, he's a burgeoning capitalist, he's going to make all this money. And, so I got a small interest from, a small group. But it wasn't really the kind of thing where I could have gone on in, even through my 20s for that kind of stuff.
You never know. Now you'll never know.
Oh, I know.
See?
I know I made the right choice. I really am very, very clear that the choice that I made was the choice. They couldn't get any more, like, introverted and obscure, basically. And I think the kind of people that maintain, the kind of people, you know McAfee. You know the story of McAfee, right?
I don't know the story of it, no.
Well, you know who McAfee is, right?
No, I only know the no.
So McAfee is actually a person. His name is John McAfee. We share a mutual friend, actually. And my friend was an artist. Well, he's an artist, and he did a lot of murals for McAfee. Anyway, McAfee obviously cashed out of the antiviral software, I don't know, maybe 20 years ago, and sold his name to Computer Associates or whoever picked up McAfee initially. And he's a bit of a nut. He went down to Belize. He was accused of murdering this guy. He went on a kind of country-hopping tour of South America last year and is now back in the US. It's not really clear what happened. Obviously the guy's dead, who he was involved with, but that whole thing was kind of like,
how
was
bizarre.
It a setup? But he's nuts.
Wow.
And he's the most mainstream of the of the generation of antiviral authors that I had anything to do with.
Oh, that's so weird. But he definitely got into it at the right time.
Well, in terms of being
made a ton of money. Yeah.
In terms of being a multimillionaire. But not in terms of maintaining one's sanity. So, although, my artist friend spent quite a bit of time with him. Although when all this initial stuff associated with the murder investigation and McAfee on the Run came out, my friend was just like, kind of expected this might happen.
Wow.
Just on the fringes, basically.
Maybe it's just one of those things that makes you kind of nuts. You either wind up working for the CIA or you wind up crazy. Or both.
Or both, yeah.
Yeah, or both.
I think the level of obsession and also the fact that there are at the time that I wrote antivirus software, there were constantly new viruses. And you're constantly trying to beat these algorithms, and in the process, you'd occasionally be contacted by, what you'd call them virus authors or hackers or a variety of folk, and it was all very curious. But no, I'm very pleased with the decision I made. Netflix certainly keeps me on the straight and narrow, and I think, it's not something I would have pursued through my 20s. After I met Louis Hong Thong, when I must have been 18 at the time, it seemed perfectly clear that if he was the most normal antiviral author that I could get access to, that this was just not a profession for me. There was
Too many nuts.
There was an interesting... Actually, I used to stay with my grandparents in the summer months. My grandfather was a doctor, and my grandmother was, she basically invested money. And I pointed out to them when I was about 15 that actually this antiviral thing could be quite lucrative. And, there were plenty of examples of people who were already doing it. And would they be interested in, fronting a little money to start a small company?
Good idea.
No,
and they weren't interested.
They hated computers. They thought I was going to end up a degenerate anyway. So, yeah, I've had a few stories like that, but that was one of the more curious ones because I think anyone else... Well, certainly, for example, when I worked for the equivalent of the Department of Justice in Australia.
Oh,
and the guy who I worked with very closely was actually very nice to me. He thought I was, an exceptional person who could do this amazing stuff. So it was moderately good for my ego for a short period of time.
Right.
But, I think, I've made my choices and antiviral software wasn't one of them. I might consider writing a retrospective, but I don't really... I've got a lot of the old code and stuff, but I don't know whether it's anything that would be applicable.
Well, the thing that's kind of cool about this book, I think, is that some of the chapters, just by the very nature of the topic of the book, are going to be speculative. Mm-hmm. So it's emerging technology. So I have a chemist who's talking about a procedure, and I'm going to leave it mysterious just to kind of build mystique around the book. But he is talking about a procedure that he thinks should be used in every crime lab, in the world. Mm-hmm. And I heard him talk about it at this conference in San Antonio. And it's really pretty common sense, and it's really pretty simple. It's not high tech. And it's something that once you hear it, you're like, wow, I can't believe they're not doing that already in crime labs. So it's almost something that he's made up, he's imagined, and he's thought through it. And it's speculative. It's like, will people adopt this practice? Will they not? Mm. So that's what's kind of cool about the book. It's just ideas, future ideas, hypotheses. So, you could do something like, given the nature of computers now, where is cyber crime and cyber crime fighting headed? Like just a retrospective and then a forward-looking hypothesis, something like that. That could be really cool,
yeah,
I think.
Part of the reason I got into antiviral software writing was I started to realize that I could determine patterns in particular infections and things like this. And it was on the kind of cusp of, if I pursue this any further, I will become Louis Hong Thong. So, but the thing that struck me from that was that very similar to like sexually transmitted diseases, for example, these viruses were very good, almost like fingerprints of where information had been or where networks had connected and these kind of things.
Yeah.
And I thought there was a lot more to that. This is really part of the book Field of Chaos, which is still available on Amazon if people are interested.
And this is a book that you wrote, or you wrote a chapter?
No, this is a book I wrote. The first part of it is effectively speculative fiction, but the second part of it is based on my experiences going to a kind of radicalized cyber hippie colony where the first section of the book had already disseminated amongst at least, a small number of these kind of radical thinkers of kind of my generation. And yeah, I don't know, it's something that I return to periodically just because it reminds me of a very short period of my life. But yeah, I don't know, it was originally just one book and then I added the second book to it to make it more kind of standard novel length. Very
cool. I'm looking at it right now. And who is that on the cover with you?
That's me and my friend who went to the cyber hippie colony with me. He's a kind of recurring character through the first part as well.
How interesting. Is it sort of like an on-the-road meets cyber crime hippie colony?
It's got elements of both. I think it's mainly the takeaway from it, which is why I still support it in terms of keeping it out there, is it's just about not taking things too seriously. I think this is it's a theme through my life that I've tried to perpetuate, that whenever anyone starts looking at my stuff and getting slightly too obsessively interested, I just make the point that most of it's philosophical satire. And in this case, one of the individuals had taken things a bit to a slight extreme and kind of overdeveloped some of these things, and it's more, the second section is really more an analysis of him, in some regard. Certainly my friend and I are more incidental characters through the second half.
I'll get it on my Kindle.
I'm not sure how the Kindle version reads. I paid an artist to actually create a comic book out of it about 2 years ago.
Ooh, good idea.
And she got about a third of the way through it on the amount that I paid her.
Oh, wow.
And then I just decided that the project it just wasn't really working out. The drawing was good in parts. The PDF, the comic, is probably the best introduction, and that is freely available, actually. It's on the Stone Ape feed, so I can pass you the link to that, and you can at least pick up the comic and see what you think of that before you make the expensive Kindle purchase.
I know, it's $2.99. I'm going to really think about that one.
Yeah, so... Anyway, I'll pass you the comic book first and see what you think of that. But the comic book kind of starts halfway through, and is more a kind of caricature of certain element.
Oh, nice.
But, so a topic that I did want to discuss this evening relates to some of the work that I've been doing recently with Noble Ape, but I also appreciate that our listeners come to this recording from a variety of sources, and you have a slightly advanced view of Noble Ape, having worked or been the editor on a chapter of mine in The Origins of Mind. So I thought I should probably take a step back and just explain what this Noble Ape thing is.
Yes.
So, after I wrote antiviral software, I had a series of simulations that I had developed that did interesting things. This agar simulation was one of them. And because I was getting out of antiviral software very quickly, I met a fellow at a party who was a virtual reality guru in Australia at the time. And he said to me, "Oh, you should be developing virtual reality software." So I looked at the virtual reality offerings, and the stuff that really interested me was more philosophical in nature. And because I was studying philosophy at the time, and the academics, the professors, were very negative towards any kind of computation, I had an instigator who said to me, "Well, Tom, you have the knowledge in computing, because obviously I'd done a number of programs. Why don't you create a simulation to test philosophical principles?" And I thought, well, that would be interesting. So Noble Ape initially existed as a landscape simulation that had a kind of biological ecosystem that the noble apes could interact with. They could eat, they could move around. Every part of the island formation, which was the way it started, would be unique and different. So there wouldn't be a problem with noble apes kind of wandering over different parts of the island and thinking they were in the same place, because it all appeared unique. And also an internal cognitive simulation that was based on the aforementioned agar simulation, and really about two competing ideas, one associated with long-term desire, i.e. motivating desire, either in places in space or places in time, that the apes were kind of yearning for a variety of reasons, and then also fear, which was a complete counteraction to the desire, and enabled them to flee rapidly if they saw some bushes moving or all this kind of stuff. Through this early development, and this was done in 1996, I realized that it would be impossible for me to describe the Noble Ape simulation without some breaking of the historical anthropomorphic divide. And I don't really care anymore. So I talk about the Noble Apes as if they're entities, because oftentimes I can actually interrogate the Noble Apes far better than I can interrogate humans that interact with me. I can get more data from the Noble Apes. And for this reason, I guess I'm in a somewhat extreme pigeonholed aspect, but I don't really care about that because it's immaterial. I run the simulation, I do what I need to do. So for probably about until 2003, Noble Ape was a very simple kind of linear simulation that was originally written for very old computers and progressively modernized. And then Apple Computer picked up the simulation. Now, I was in pretty well constant development from 96 through to 2003, but Apple wanted to test certain processor metrics with Noble 8. So they created this 8 brain cycles per second metric, which they used to show improvements that could be done through the software and also utilizing new processors that they were running with and this kind of stuff. In about 2005, this was picked up by Intel. And there was a fellow at Intel who developed, there was a small team at Apple, probably about 10, maybe 15 engineers total, touched Noble 8. But when it went to Intel, and it kind of continued on at Apple, and there were evangelists within Apple that promote Noble 8. But when it went to Intel, it went to a team of about probably 20 engineers, and it was like an introduction to the team. So the manager of the team, when he first started, had first picked up the simulation from Apple. And I went and met with them in, I think, 2009, maybe, and met all the engineers, including the manager who'd set up the team. And one of the engineers there had this idea that, or actually there was a movement to think of processing more in an atomic model. So rather than having these linear programs of code that were being executed, maybe even on separate processors or separate threads, it was about dividing the executions down into small components that could then be placed on various processors or various, network computers or what have you. So he did an initial implementation of that, but it wasn't particularly good, and it was only associated with the cognitive simulation. And from probably 2007 till about maybe last year, I was trying to crack this nut, which is how do you get, if you've got 8 processors, as you do in most modern computers, or 4 processors, how do you get the most out of the processors? Mm-hmm. So before coming on this call, I actually did a test associated with this, so I'll share the numbers. If you divide what is typically linear calculations, and you look at them in terms of each individual ape in the simulation, and then when every time each individual ape references another ape, you then divide the processing even smaller. You can get, on a 4-core processor, you get about a 20 times speed improvement. On an 8-core processor, you get about a 40 times speed improvement. It's not linear, well, it appears linear through that calculation, but it's not quite linear in terms of the number of processors, because what you have is you have short processors and long processors. So what's this got to do with philosophy, you might ask? Well, historically, artificial life software, and this is this whole notion of von Neumann computing and everything being kind of represented in kind of step calculations. So every time you do the same step calculations, you get the same results. And all these kind of ideas have been relatively central. I think you appeared on a podcast that I recorded where this actually became quite a heated discussion. Because at the time, I knew the work that Intel had already done with Noble 8, although I wasn't completely up to speed with it. And I realized that if you eliminated some of these aspects of certainty, you could get amazing processing power. So the philosophical dilemma that I have with Noble 8 currently is that when you break these things into little atoms, they can be calculated at the same time. In fact, things that historically have been calculated after other things can be calculated before, and it doesn't matter. So you have this kind of localized idea that it's all coherent and everything's being processed, but you lose the element of order. I don't think that's a particularly problematic point, although it caused a number of concerns in the discussion we had about 4 or 5 years ago. But I think it makes a very interesting point of analysis associated with kind of big R reality. Because our perception of big R reality is that we have all this stuff that's going on in kind of linear fashion, but we also have this notion of causation, which is curious when you start to think of it in these two ways. It's almost like a photon has wave-like and particle-like properties. What we want from reality is both parallel and also causal effects. And I think it's interesting in simulation terms that when you lose the reproducibility that you once had, it's almost like you are free to actually do these simulations more in the light of the way things are in the big real world.
Yeah. It's messier, not quite as simple.
It's interesting because there's, in parallel to this, funnily enough, there's a movement in computing associated with functional programming and reactive programming. And what that is exactly this phenomena, as I've done with Noble 8. You divide things into their kind of rawest elements and then you spread them out on these massive, Amazon clouds. And you get amazingly fast processing power without this nature of kind of causal surety in the steps. But you are in a domain where that doesn't matter because you're processing so much data that, the ability to have, this kind of causal surety that you would have in standard serial computing is no longer applicable.
So in the Noble 8, the distinction is between whether you're doing it serially or in parallel. Is that right?
It's something like that, but it's a bit more... So that's kind of... There's still two old computing terms of like 20 years ago. What you need to think is not even in parallel anymore, but things have just been viscerated and divided where... So if things take slightly longer, then they will be slowed down naturally by this process, because the things that are shorter will be optimized to... Well, I mean, it's a bit like a road. If you had a 4-lane highway, then the slow cars and the fast cars aren't necessarily going to cause a traffic jam, because the fast cars will be able to get through and slow cars will be able to do their thing. If you have an 8-lane highway, you have even less of these concerns, because these independent parts can move around.
Right.
So it's a different... I mean, it's very powerful. And the thing that strikes me is that the artificial life community... I saw one paper at the A-Life conference this year for it, and I put a big thumbs up on that paper, and it was rejected. So you have this kind of traditional element in artificial life, which is always working against, whatever the latest stuff is. And also I think this is incredibly powerful because it gives you an ability to problems that would typically take, days to calculate can now take, minutes to calculate through these kind of approaches. It requires a different kind of mathematics. It requires a different way of dividing the data. But once you do that, you get this processing power that basically the rest of the technological world that's doing anything, that massively scaled is utilizing. And it seems disappointing, I guess, that the artificial life community isn't embracing these kind of ideas.
And why do you think that they're not? Is it just, it sounds like you're saying the A-Life community is almost inherently contrarian. Well, or contrarian, like whatever new comes along, they're already like, no, on to the next thing. Do you think it's more an attitude, or do you think they have real philosophical, fundamental reason for not getting on board with it?
I think what I found was an atrophy, and it's an atrophy based on where biology is currently associated. This is academic biology, in terms of just not embracing complexity. And anything that, the kind of calculations that you're doing here are complex by their nature, because you're dealing with, multi-participant interactions plus a wide variety of other additional simulation elements. So I think it's a conversation that almost cannot be had, because they are looking at something which is so distinctly different. But in terms of philosophical principles, I thought there were kind of... I don't know, I've looked at this, I guess, for about 6 months now, solidly. And the thing that strikes me from it is that I'm getting exactly the same... Well, it's not exactly the same data, but it's data that's as good as the data I was getting through traditional serial or even standard linear parallel processing models. I'm not doubting the data that I'm receiving. It's just done in a different order, which means that the causation elements, which I probably should look at more, are, not in the same order that they would be if it was serialized. But it makes me think also about observed reality. And there are many different models within observed reality that interest me. But one of them is associated with removing discrete time. You can, through calculus, remove the notion of discrete time. If you're familiar with the game of life, there was an implementation maybe 4 years ago. In fact, I have the interview audio in the Biota feed with a fellow who had done... rather than taking discrete cells, he had used calculus to create infinite cells, and what he ended up with, I'm not sure if you saw it, was these kind of oil-like blobs which moved around with the original Game of Life cell rules, but in calculus that had eliminated the cell walls and made them discrete entities.
How interesting. No, I don't remember that about it at all.
So that would have been, it's probably one of the last, I don't know, it would have been probably 2011, maybe 2012. The fellow asked for me to give him a list of questions that he would then respond to. English was not his first language. He was also completely overwhelmed by the response that he received, and having put this YouTube video out maybe 6 months earlier, decided that he wasn't going to continue to pursue this development because the contact was too overwhelming for him.
Wow.
But I've always thought that the same existed in time-based simulations, that you can actually reduce it down. And I've had a conversation, at least one, in the Biota feed with Jeffrey Ventrella on this. Causation is a relatively central tenet to most metaphysics, or at least either a rejection of causation or some interpolation that presents causation. And this allows you to also give the approximation that we're without free will, that many have done too. But if you look at these kind of simulations, in particular the fact that there is no, on a very fundamental level, there is no kind of control in the order, which in itself breeds a kind of chaos, I find it very interesting that this analysis could be used to, I guess determinism is the terminology, that this is an assault on determinism because it breaks down the linear perception of causation.
You can make a simulation that either makes time discrete or makes time continuous and essentially changes your sense of reality. And then the philosophical question is, which is the quote, real reality, right? So, with geometry, you can show that there are 16 dimensions to space or something like that, right? Physicists can quote, prove that there are that many dimensions to space, but we only experience 4. So which is the real reality? That's the philosophical question.
I guess my concern is that there's a kind of neo-determinism that has come through recently, and Sam Harris talks about it occasionally. But this notion that there are a series of kind of causal real-world descriptions and then, therefore, determinism. And I think the thing that interests me through this simulation idea is that if there are so many things in parallel that are causally independent, but then we establish through this causation through a kind of weak philosophical analysis, then determinism obviously follows through. But if you actually start exploring what extreme parallelization means in terms of predictability and in terms of kind of micro-interactions, then determinism is on pretty, shoddy ground. And I find it very curious that there's a new kind of deterministic view that's particularly coming through, I guess, what I'd call the radical atheist community now. It's almost an extreme kind of misinterpretation of science with a little bit of first-year philosophy, therefore determinism. And I think certainly my experience with simulation flies in the face of that, particularly associated with notions of surety.
How so?
Well, I mean, restating the point again, within simple simulation constraints over how many processes I want to throw at a problem, the more parallelism in the simulated environment, the less surety that I can give to the environment. But I think this actually gives a good real-world description as well. And through that, what has philosophically been called determinism seems to be on relatively shoddy ground, at least. Well, I guess I come to this because Kant had probably too much of an influence on me, and that kind of spiraled me, although I kind of grabbed hold of Bertrand Russell at some stage, that kind of spiraled me into, the whole ability to, the resolution of perception, basically. The ability to come to a realization that we do have limits to these things, and these limits are very rarely, discussed, except in the development of early quantum mechanics. But certainly none of the, present-day scientists refer to Kant in their general discussion.
Well, some do. I mean, not so much in traditional science. I'm trying to think of any examples, but he does come up in cognitive science because of his work looking at the categories of the mind, the categories of experience. But I found I always got in trouble when I tried to use Kant in my own writing about cognitive science. Always somebody's quick to say, you've misunderstood Kant or you're misrepresenting Kant. And I don't know. I don't know why that is, because it is strange that someone should think they, have ownership of a philosopher's ideas, because they can, of course, be interpreted many ways. But, since I was always already thinking in terms of the mind and experience and reality is a combination of the two and those sorts of things. I interpreted Kant one way, but he's a really, really difficult philosopher to use because I feel like always run into trouble with, somebody who thinks that they understand him more deeply than you do or something like that. But he certainly gets into those notions of the mind is structured a certain way, the universe is structured a certain way, and that's why we experience reality the way we do, and we can't experience it differently. And I think all of that is true at a very deep, fundamental metaphysical picture of reality. I think all of that is true, which kind of brings you back to that question of, you can make a simulation that makes reality seem this way or look that way. And then there's the reality that we experience, and which one is more real or more true.
Well, I've always thought of, although I talk about it flippantly, I always think of simulation as a tool.
Mm-hmm.
Simulation gives you an ability to start with sometimes things that you have control over, but rarely in interesting simulations will you start with things that you have control over, and then just see what emerges from that.
Mm-hmm.
So you can write a simulation in a wide variety of different ways, and it will give you different modes of analysis. And certainly this was something that I tried to embody, at least in the early part of Noble Eight, was making sure that, to the letter wherever possible, I was sticking with what a particular philosopher said, and then could write a simulation in a completely different mode. I think, Russell's logical atomism created a very simple simulation that people could see, and you could kind of point to various bits and pieces. But as soon as you started to look at the boundaries of perception, and I guess you're right, there's a lot to Kant, and perhaps people focus on their own favourite section. So perhaps the criticism that you didn't know Kant like the other person knew Kant could easily have been measured by saying, well, actually, you probably just like different parts of Kant than I like, and the gravity that you put on certain parts of Kant, I may not put on certain parts of Kant. But yes, that does seem like a very strange criticism.
Well, that's certainly that always was my approach in philosophy, because there's and then Kant wrote so much stuff about ethics. I had an entire class in college, undergraduate, Kant's moral philosophy.
Certainly,
and that's a whole part of his canon is just ethics. And to me, just because I didn't work in ethics, it's not as interesting. I liked much more his metaphysics, but he I think he's one that you can't, I've certainly gotten in trouble for trying to use him here and there as it kind of works with whatever point I'm trying to make in cognitive science, where maybe you can get away with that with some philosophers, but he seems like the one where you don't want to try to do that with a serious analytical philosopher in the room, But
certainly he was, I don't know if he is presently, I doubt it, but when you look at the early creators of quantum mechanics, Bohr, Feynman, all these kind of folk, they all had studied Kant, some more intimately than others, but their personal writings and correspondence, which is a book, unfortunately, that I lost when I moved from Australia, was a very inspirational book for me. It was a little yellow book that had their personal writings, I don't think specifically associated with Kant. There was a lot of other stuff. They talked about baseball and other things.
Wow.
But Kant did make a solid, and it made me realise that if you learnt Kant in school, you'd probably have a very different relationship to Kant than if you learnt Kant at university, or as your academic sparring partner points out, had some intimacy with Kant through university. And the way that they used it was in a very applied fashion, but very interesting, associated with shaping, because the quantum mechanics is this notion of quanta. It's this notion that there are discrete quantities within these things, although there are wave functions, all these other things, there are actual steps. And these quanta are based on, in large part, Kantian ideas of the resolution of perception. And to see this written out extensively, and men who I guess were in their 20s at the time, but really creating the bedrock for something that we haven't seen any Kuhnian paradigm shifts in, and certainly in my lifetime. We may not see them in, your son's lifetime or those that follow. But it was fascinating, and that, I guess there's an applied version of Kant which probably relates to how he was taught in German schools, or at least these kind of ideas.
Yeah.
And the thing that I returned to was not his ethics, but his aesthetics. The notion of the sublime and the effect of the sublime is something that whenever I see like a large rock formation or a big and beautiful tree, I like going and spending some kind of Kantian sublime time with the particular entity. And it's very, I mean, if Kant had come after Darwin, I'm sure he would have embodied some of the kind of simian protocol in some of his writing. I mean, he really, I can't say enough about Kant as a thinker and an influence.
See, that's a perfect example because his aesthetics, that too, and I steered away from that class in graduate school because that was a bear. You read the third critique, right? The critique of pure reason, which is notoriously his most difficult, challenging.
CPR for a reason, right?
Right, exactly. And you steer clear of it. Although, I mean, at the same time, I was studying Heidegger, so which isn't, that much simpler. But yeah, his Kant's aesthetics, that whole part of his work is something that I am completely unfamiliar with. And yeah, I mean, he really did it all. But I think you're probably right that maybe he was such an important figure that maybe the German educational system kind of got, fed him to the kids kind of early enough that they got some sort of fundamental understanding of him where, I didn't know Kant's name till I was 20 years old, and then there's a lot to catch up on. But I think, his distinction between the noumena and the phenomena. So there's the world that you see, the world of perception, and then the world in itself, the noumena, what it really is. So I can see that being important to sort of the fathers of quantum thinking, okay, there's something more going on at another level of reality that we're just guessing at, we're just grasping at, it's there and our calculations kind of show evidence of it, but we can't see it. We'll never be able to see it. Yeah. So yeah, I can see that distinction being important to kind of the genesis of that thinking. Definitely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, the atomic microscope as a kind of resolution still is very curious. I guess I read too much science fiction as a child. My hope was always that... And Kuhn, I guess, permeated my early childhood as well, in large part through my father's discussions with his colleagues and these kind of things. So I knew the notion that I was, on one side, reading the science fiction that these things would be happening, but also that the thinkers had predicted that this would happen and that, things would get a lot more interesting. I guess the apocalypse, the, water shortage apocalypse and the great heat and these kind of things was what I got instead, but, you can't pick what wisdom you're going to get from books when you're 6, unfortunately.
You can't. It definitely sounded exciting, but I just heard something recently. It must have been a story on NPR or something where they were talking about all these wonderful utopian ideas from, the classic Ray Bradbury type 1950s sci-fi. And how, nothing's come to fruition. Nothing. Yeah. We must suck compared to where they thought we were going to be in, the year 2000 and something. And but the other side of it is that so many things that we didn't imagine and could not have imagined have come about. And they're amazing and incredible, but just not flying cars and, colonizing other planets. We just haven't done any of that stuff yet.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess when I was here more than a decade ago, everyone was talking about the cellular revolution, i.e. mobile phones with operating systems and these kind of things. It took about 8 to 10 years to be, well, almost in everyone's hand, but certainly to get to that level. I think there are conservative influences in technology which move it considerably slower than it should naturally move. I mean, if you read, Moore et al., you get the idea that things are going to be getting considerably faster. And in truth, computation, like raw computation in silica, is absolutely amazing. I mean, the amount of processing that we now have at our, hands is beyond belief, but we have no means to actually utilise that other than writing email or, surfing cat videos. So, unfortunately, the software offers
we can see more cat videos faster.
True. And now that finally even the people filming cats have realised what HD means. So we can actually see their fur now, whereas previously they were just kind of pixelated blobs that moved around. But, it is interesting, this notion of futurism, which is something that I've thought about quite a bit, primarily because I've had a good exposure to futurists. And I have mixed feelings about the whole profession of futurism.
I bet. Well, you also think that a lot of these futurists are somewhat, ironically, outdated.
Yeah, and quite naive.
Right. I've been meaning to ask you what you think of Jaron Lanier.
So,
this stuff.
I call him Jaron, but I've known him.
What do I know?
It doesn't matter, he probably calls himself by a wide variety of names. Returning to our earlier conversation this evening, I thought for a short period of time at least that virtual reality would be an amazing technology. Jaron Lanier was one of the founding fathers of VR and would talk on all the things associated with how he would play these VR instruments and we would all be immersive. And of course he had the dreadlocks, so, he had to be believed.
He had some credibility.
I thought the thing is that I went and actually met with VR companies, and I met a number of really bright people in the field of VR. But the whole thing went bust. I mean, obviously now we have Oculus Rift and what have you. But the whole thing went bust primarily because you had these futurist visionaries like Jaron and co. who not necessarily made wild predictions, but just weren't doers. They were talkers. And being part of a group of doers, the speed at which the bottom fell out of this thing was very swift and somewhat obviously someone had cashed in somewhere along the line, but it just wasn't any of us doing any development in it. His narrative is kind of curious. I mean, I share a number of mutual friends with him. I've never actually met the man. But no, I think he's done some raps recently associated with how this free culture is bad and we need to have incremental income through all the stuff that we produce. And all these kind of regressive...
so he's getting political and... No, I didn't know that.
Because I have one degree of separation with him, I know that as many of these thinkers are, as I call him Ray Kurzweil's exactly the same. They're now in the kind of 50s, 60s. They're in this kind of period of malaise. Look, I'm feeling it in my late 30s, so don't get me wrong. I feel a period of malaise coming on as well. And the whole, it's kind of strange that people can continue to be futurists indefinitely. It's not that the predictions that they make are bad. It's just that people don't go and talk to technologists in these circumstances. So the technology is distinctly different to what the futurists say. And there's very rarely realignment where people will actually reach out. Because I guess I don't have dreadlocks, you see. So, they're not going to come and talk to me.
Now you sound like my brother. Well, what I think is unique about him is that given his background as one of the developers of virtual reality.
No, he was just a talker. Let's be honest here.
Really?
I don't think he has... aside from interacting with his instruments and stuff, I don't know. He may hold patents I've never seen, but he wasn't one of the people who actually created the groundwork for VR. He was just the one who appeared in all the documentaries.
He's definitely marketed that way, though.
Clearly.
So you could be right, because I'm not in that world, but I'm just saying that's how he's marketed.
Anyway, continuing. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have cut you off at that point. Continue.
No, that's okay. We need to set the record straight. Dreadlocks or not. What is the true story? But I think what's interesting about him is in his book. Did you read the book? I am not a gadget, or you are not a gadget.
This is the one where he was talking about incremental payments, right?
Incremental what?
Payments. So the notion that rather than...
I don't remember that part of it. Being the philosopher, I took the big picture away from it. And what I remember is more this idea, he's highly critical of the idea that computers will continue on this crazy trajectory of progress, getting faster, smaller.
Yeah.
He thinks that there is a definite brick wall. There's a stop.
He's felt it in his own career. I mean, this is the nature of his experience.
And
I don't want to be flip about this. I mean, my feeling is that actually this is exactly the terminology I was talking about, associated with kind of natural degradation of the human body and the fact that it creates this kind of misery. When I was...
No, but he had a whole complex and rather interesting argument to that point. It wasn't just like he was having a bad day and he wrote that book, right? I mean, his idea is that computers have sort of a natural shut-off mechanism where if they continue to get faster and more complex, they're going to get so complicated that nothing's going to work. So it's almost like it's going to bounce up against this wall and then have a regression point where things are getting not better, but worse.
Unfortunately, Mr. Lanier, as he did 15, 20 years ago, I mean, I spend my days, I don't work in the server aspects of Netflix, but I have a certain intimacy with that area. And actually, I mean, I do have some knowledge in that area. Things are getting amazingly complex. Sure, there are, I mean, not just at Netflix, all over the place, there are outages with this kind of technology. But if you chart the movement of these technologies, and if you chart the complexity, they're not slowing down, they're getting more complex. And they're getting more complex at an exponential rate. In fact, the descriptions associated with how these things would develop are not applicable to the present day of what is being done. The problem with Lanier is he doesn't go into these companies. I mean, Ray K at least works at Google. I mean, hopefully that would kind of rub off on him on some level. But unfortunately, Lanier has this kind of popularist view. There's this character called Magic Alex. Magic Alex was a friend, I think, of John Lennon's, and he went into Abbey Road and he said he could rewire Abbey Road studios. And he created this wall of tiny little speakers, which he slowly soldered together. And he was a complete nut. He couldn't do anything. And when I was 21, seeing Lanier doing his whole thing, I wrote that, and Malaysian Magazine had run an article. I was in Malaysia. I just penned them a quick letter saying, you need to do an expose on Magic Alex and follow the parallels with Lanier. I don't feel he's a competent technologist, and I think it's extraordinary that within certain hierarchies, he's not... I mean, it's sad to lampoon the man because, I mean, from what I understand, with one degree of separation, he's a relatively fragile individual who certainly felt his demise through the crash of VR. But whatever is going on, it would be far more interesting to actually... And the beauty of this, with Netflix at least, is almost all the stuff that's produced on the server side is released open source. So anyone who wants to go scrutinize what's going on with the complexity and the volume of technology associated, at least with the company that pays my bills, is able to go and do it. And if Lanier actually did this kind of analysis, which I don't think he's capable of doing, but if he did, he would write a distinctly different book. And it just saddens me that he's in a position now where he could actually gain some degree of credibility by doing some interesting analysis and actually writing more associated with what's going on, but instead he writes these kind of populist things, which obviously, appeal to folks such as yourself,
right.
But they're not actually in any way encapsulating what's going on currently. I mean, it's not really something I can talk to, because...
How interesting.
Yeah.
I'm surprised, because I would think he's certainly gotten a lot of mileage out of it. I mean,
clearly, because I don't think... I think the nature of journalism as it is today... I mean, when I was doing Biota Live, even prior when I was just doing the regular Biota podcast, I would periodically contact journalists who were either writing associated... I mean, let's talk about the Game of Life, for example. In 2011, someone put up a press release associated with how they had created Cellular Automata for the first time and how it was amazing. It was a Game of Life that they had written in 2011. And there were about 30 articles in mainstream publications, including on CNN, that lauded this to be the greatest thing ever. That, the building blocks of life had been cracked through cellular automata. These were people, journalists who were predominantly in their early 20s and just couldn't comprehend or write coherently associated with this. Through my time at Biota, I did this probably about 24 times, where I would contact journalists and say, actually, if you're looking at this, maybe you should consider looking at that. This is slightly more interesting. You've gotten a few basic facts wrong here. Our mutual friend, what was the fellow's name at Oxford, who wrote that chapter about how, simulations of reality would never be possible, and then everyone started championing him as, what was his name? Nick Bostrom. He wrote this article, which when you read it as a philosopher, or even me, or not even, a former philosophy student, you get one view of it, and then people that read, the first paragraph and the last paragraph get a completely different view of it. So, yeah.
Wait, was he saying virtual reality wasn't possible?
He was saying that simulated... He created a series of constructs which were very curious in and of themselves, where the conclusion was that simulated reality would never be possible.
But that's such a broad statement, though.
It was extraordinary. If you went through it and actually analysed... Firstly, he had a very curious...
I remember seeing it. I don't remember it now.
He had a very curious notion of, resolution. Anyway, I'll move on from, previously mentioned folk that have had similar curious notions. But he had this view, the ability to write a simulation that simulates a small area to a certain resolution is relatively trivial. It's taught to first and second year students of physics. It's not a particularly problematic thing, and it enables you to show Brownian motion amongst other things. I mean, very basic interactions in physics. He must have just missed that. I guess, being a philosopher, you never actually need to go and read how simulation is actually done. You can kind of postulate what simulation must be like from first principles. And that was, the start of a series of mistakes that he made through this. Now, in present day, people talk about him as being the champion of simulated reality.
Oh my gosh. So, well, this is just, and he's trained as a philosopher.
Yeah, Oxford, whatever that means.
Nick Bostrom, whatever that means. Well, that's very typical. I think of academic philosophy, where you have philosophers of physics can talk about physics in sort of an insulated way. That's not necessarily, and I'm not saying it's always the case, but not necessarily connected to the discussions or the insights or the breakthroughs in physics itself.
Our favorite philosophy book, The Philosophy of Artificial Life by Margaret O. Bowden, who edited it, has a chapter associated with a fellow called, I think his name was David Kirsch. Or Kirsch is his surname anyway. And he went to Rodney Brooks' lab at MIT, the media lab, and observed a robotic cockroach, I think, that Brooks had made. He spent, I think, about a month there, just observing the interaction between Brooks and his team and this robotic cockroach. And then wrote, what's it called, Today Earwig, Tomorrow Man, which I think is still one of the most interesting philosophical texts in this field, because it is an applied philosopher. It is a philosopher who takes his philosophy knowledge and he goes to this place of discovery. I mean, you can talk about what happened to Brooks' work following that, in terms of iRobot and militarism and a wide variety of other things. But he went there at least at a kind of golden age in 91 and observed this lab. And then wrote a chapter based on it. I mean, I think the thing that philosophers could really do themselves a service if they did something similar with regards to a wide variety of things.
No kidding. Yeah, well, you're preaching to the choir. I mean...
Well, we're both on the right side of philosophy now, aren't we? So.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I've been saying that for 10 years or so, and I spent the last about 2 years getting interested in forensic science, and I don't have a degree in it. I don't have my training in it. I'm not an investigator or a detective, but I did my research. I sat in on courses, short courses. I read a whole bunch of stuff. I talked to a whole bunch of people, and I did my research and presented the first paper using some ideas from Karl Popper, the philosopher of science, and trying to understand how forensic science works from a Popperian kind of model. It is a real science, and here's how it works. And I presented it at a philosophy conference, and I had somebody in the audience completely rewrite my whole paper. Oh, I think you mean this, and I think you mean that. And I didn't you mean to include this and that? And It's just hilarious to me because nobody in philosophy is looking at forensic science. You have law professors and criminal justice professors and psychology professors looking at forensic science, but you don't have anybody in philosophy doing it. And yet philosophers feel completely comfortable saying, oh, this is what you're doing and this is how you can do it better, even though they haven't thought about it for more than the 18 minutes you presented your paper to them. So it's just a very curious discipline that, although there are all these subdisciplines, philosophy of X, a lot of those subdisciplines are kind of fooling themselves, thinking that they're really integrating with that X, but they're really not. And yeah, it's frustrating. And philosophy of artificial intelligence or robotics is certainly no exception. That's why I actually like the writings of Rodney Brooks, because I think he's first and foremost a scientist, but he writes in such an accessible way that philosophers, non-technical philosophers, can read it like myself and understand it, get the essence of it, the insights. And that's really a skill. That's so rare.
Yes.
I think, and you've done it too.
I don't know if you could compare the two of us, but thankfully I live in a slightly warmer climate, so.
I think he's such a good writer. It's hard to do that, with any science. He's the best example I can think of from robotics. But, anybody who's a hardcore scientist and generates the data and writes the research papers, but can also write for Scientific American and explain it to the rest of us, that's, I think, an amazing skill.
Certainly.
Yeah.
So, Liz, I'm kind of out of topics to talk about. Is there anything that you wanted to raise, or should we call it a short one?
I think we can call it a short one. I have had a really long day, and...
Ditto. Ditto. So, yes, maybe the 1 hour format will frame these conversations going forwards, which may appeal to some listeners, may not to others. I did have one final thought, which swept over me through that period. So, one of the things that Heron started, he started it in name alone by handing out business cards with this on it, is the Centre for Applied Epistemology. And it's something that I have picked up as a kind of anti-philosophy. It's not anti-philosophy at all. It's just about providing epistemology to the masses, or at least epistemological critiques to the masses. It doesn't yet have an online presence. I did purchase appliedepistemology.org, but I'm yet to work out how to actually take it.
I can't believe that somebody hasn't taken that already.
Well, someone tried to sell me epistemology.org recently. And they originally said, well, will you buy it for $60? And I said, oh, yeah, certainly, that's a steal. And then they came back and said, would you buy it for $220? And I didn't respond to their email.
How about 5,000?
I know how this works, and I'm not responding to any more emails. So
that's
who knows?
Ridiculous.
Maybe someone purchased Applied Epistemology for $5,000, but it sure wasn't me. But for $60, I would have picked it up. Yeah,
but appliedepistemology.org, I'm really, really surprised that there's not some aspiring philosophy professor out there who didn't snatch that up.
Sucks to be them.
So is it going to be a real website? We're going to do pictures and bios and everything?
I don't know how I will take it, but I have it anyway for when the mood approaches me. I have all these projects that are just like back burner projects that I realize one day, probably in early summer next year, I'll just be like, today's the day I finally get the appliedepistemology.org website together. Let me at it. And then it just happens.
After a pot of coffee. I think you need to hire a personal assistant.
Well, this has oftentimes come up. I mean, this is one of the things associated with working with the artist a couple of years ago, was to work out whether I could, because historically, for a short period of time, I had a publicist. And that worked out quite well. I mean, that got me on BBC Radio, and it got me writing for IEEE. But you need to be in exactly the right frame of mind, otherwise you're just wasting people's time. You've got to be ready and on it. And unfortunately, as you've noted associated with the work that you're doing currently, the work that I do doesn't always afford me like full cognitive breakthrough moments all the time. Like, I've got to use some of my mental energy to actually, make house payments and this kind of stuff. But it is something that I've thought about a bit. I mean, maybe having a part-time assistant or a part-time publicist. But the publicity thing is important because, I mean, what the publicist did for me was to write a press release that then I completely rewrote and passed back to her. So it was an interaction of forcing me to do things. And I do understand the kind of disciplinarian nature of an assistant as well. But, yeah.
Well, and then you get all these things that you have on the back burner, like you're saying, actually get done.
Well, the most important things that I have currently, aside from, maintaining a happy marriage, is producing these podcasts for people and, working at Netflix. I mean, I have a relatively good set order, and the stuff that I produce is in the order that it immediately approaches me. I think an assistant would, as you say, provide kind of stochastic, do you have this done yet? Do you have this ready? But I've got to allow for that as well, just to avoid... I mean, there's always a risk of kind of complete exhaustion, where you just are unable to move for extended periods of time, and that just sounds horrible. So
Yeah, that does. That sounds horrible. Don't let it get to that point.
Definitely not, Liz. It's been a pleasure as always. Look, I'm expecting, based on the first recording, that we will get extensive correspondence associated with this one as well. So, folks, please, feel free to contact Liz, but contact me initially and I will present it to Liz, primarily because I'm on Facebook, so...
Oh, right. And I'm not. That's right. So how can people contact me if they want to?
Well, they can contact me through you, or, sorry, they can contact you through me. They can contact
both of us through Geron Lanier.
No. Let's avoid Linear. Anyway, so email me and I'll email Liz, or contact me through Facebook and I'll contact Liz. And basically, I will be posting this on a variety of different feeds, and the people in the feeds know how to contact me through the feeds, so it'll all work itself out. By the time we get to about the 5th or 6th recording, we'll have to pick out a name, Liz, but I'm not going to commit to anything until then. Okay, and it shouldn't be applied epistemology, I think. I didn't like epistemology as a course, and so that's just going to put a negative paw on the whole thing. So I want something more, flashy, something glamorous. Definitely. Well, you'll have to pick out the name then, because I'm not capable of either of those things. So. Okay, I'll start working on it. Very good. Put it on the back burner. I'll talk to you in 2 weeks, Liz. Okay, sounds good. Bye, Tom.